Welcome. It is Verdict with Senator Ted Cruz. So nice to have you with us. Many of you listening on the radio across the country, and it was, well, one interesting week. I guess that's the best way you can put it. The sausage truly being made for all the American people to see, with the longest government shutdown in history finally over. Senator, your reaction to that?
Well, hallelujah, hallelujah. After 43 days of the government being shut down, 43 days of the Schumer shutdown where federal employees didn't get their paychecks, and yet thousands went into work. 43 days of parks being closed, museums being closed, government services being highly limited. 43 days of delays in airports, of air traffic controllers not being paid, TSA agents not being paid, flights being canceled, all because the Democrats were throwing a gigantic temper tantrum because Chuck Schumer has a political crisis. And this shutdown, the Democrats got nothing, but the purpose was not to actually get a concession. The purpose was simply to inflict a whole lot of pain on the American people, to demonstrate that, man, oh man, Schumer and the Democrats hate Donald Trump, and they hate Donald Trump so much they're willing to hurt their own constituents. President Trump, Wednesday evening, signed the legislation. We passed it out of the Senate Monday night. The House came back on Wednesday. They voted on Wednesday. They passed the legislation that we had passed, and President Trump signed it into law. Listen to him as he's signing the legislation reopening the government Wednesday night.
With all of that, I just want to tell you the country has never been in better shape. We went through this short-term disaster with the Democrats because they thought it would be good politically, and it's an honor now to sign this incredible bill and get our country working again. Thank you.
Senator, you can hear Republicans there cheering in the Oval Office. It's not every day you actually hear real cheering like that in the Oval Office. It's a little more formal usually. Obviously, Republicans surrounding the president, they were happy this is finally over and the American people aren't being held hostage anymore.
Yeah, look, the Democrats, they inflicted pain on millions of Americans. They also wasted billions of dollars of taxpayer money. Just the thousands upon thousands of government workers who stayed home for 43 days. They didn't go to work. They're all going to get paid back pay now. So 43 days. Now, for 43 days, they had the challenge of not having a paycheck, not knowing how they'd pay their mortgage, not knowing how they'd pay their rent. But now they'll get paid for all those 43 days. But you know what the American people didn't get? They didn't get any work from all the workers who stayed home for over a month because Chuck Schumer and the Democrats wanted to throw a tantrum. President Trump, at the signing ceremony, he described some of the real harms that the Schumer shutdown caused. Here, give a listen.
The past 7 weeks, the Democrats' shutdown has inflicted massive harm. They caused 20,000 flights to be canceled or delayed. They departed so many times, so late. People were hurt so badly. Nobody's ever seen anything like this one. This was a no-brainer. This was an easy extension. But they didn't want to do it the easy way. They had to do it the hard way. And they look very bad, the Democrats do. They deprived more than 1 million government workers from their paychecks and cut off food stamp benefits for millions and millions more Americans in need. They caused tens of thousands of federal contractors and small businesses to go unpaid. And the total effect of the damage their antics caused will take weeks and probably months to really calculate accurately, including the serious harm that they did to our economy and to people and to families. So I just want to tell the American people, you should not forget this. When we come up to midterms and other things, don't forget what they've done to our country. I also want to call for a termination to the filibuster so that this can never happen again.
Senator, this really was about inflicting pain. I was on CNN the night the shutdown ended as the president was talking this live, and it was amazing to see the disconnect from so many of the liberals on the show. And I'm like, what did you guys get out of this? This was the same deal that was on the table before the shutdown. So You just wanted to try to score political points. You hate Donald Trump so much that you just wanted to shut down the government and see if you could bring his approval rating down. You didn't give a damn about the kids and their food, because if you did, you would have at least made sure that those on food stamps would have gotten those benefits. You didn't care about those waiting on flights and having canceled flights and their lives being changed. Many of them going to things that are hard, like funerals or sick family members. Not everything's a vacation when you're at the airport. You took countless dollars out of our economy, small businesses that were hurt. There's a long list of people that were hurt during this, and this was all just for one reason. They hated Donald Trump, and they didn't care who got hurt in the process.
Yeah, look, the shutdown had real negative effects on the economy, on the GDP. It had real negative effects on small businesses. It had real negative effects on millions of ordinary Americans. And all of that was inflicted to score political points for the Democrats with a handful of really the crazies. You know what's amazing? After 43 days, after the longest government shutdown in history, virtually every Democrat still voted against reopening the government. So in the Senate, the vote was 60-40. Only 8 Democrats voted to reopen the government. 39 Democrats voted to keep the government closed. Chuck Schumer voted to keep the government closed. Every potential presidential candidate on the Democrat side voted to keep the government closed. So Cory Booker voted to keep it closed. Amy Klobuchar voted to keep it closed. Kirsten Gillibrand voted to keep it closed. Chris Murphy voted to keep it closed. Bernie Sanders voted to keep it closed. All of those are possible and even likely Democrat presidential candidates. And they all voted to keep it closed. In the House, the same thing was true. So the vote in the House was 222 to 209. But of the 222, only 6 were Democrats. The 6 Democrats who voted to reopen the government in the House were Adam Gray of California, Jared Golden of Maine, Tom Suozzi of New York, Marie Gluesenkamp Perez of Washington State, Don Davis of North Carolina, and Henry Cuellar of Texas. Other than that, every single Democrat in the House voted keep the government shut, keep food stamps off, keep pay stopped, don't pay air traffic controllers, keep the delays, keep the cancellations. By the way, just on flights, the FAA said it was going to reduce flights 10%. But if the shutdown had continued, the FAA had already said it would phase into 20% or more, and virtually every Democrat in both chambers said, that sounds good by me. Let's keep this going. Let's keep the shutdown. I suppose through Thanksgiving, through the busiest travel time of the year, it is amazing. The question you have to ask is who are the Democrats listening to and who are they working for?
Yep.
Because I think it's obvious on the face of it, they're not listening to the American people or working for the American people. Instead, they're listening to their radical base and they're working for their radical base and, frankly, their own political self-interest.
Senator, I want to get back into the shutdown aspect of this for just a moment. There is one, I do think, silver lining that's come out of this, and that is, one, I think we now really know who the Democratic Party is. Chuck Schumer is going to be out of a job. Nancy Pelosi's not running for re-election. The Democratic Party has gone full socialist or Marxist or communist, depending on who you talk to. But it's very clear there's an excommunication happening of the old establishment Democratic radicals. That is Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. So that's one thing that I do think has come out of the shutdown. The other part of this is there's a lot of talk right now about Obamacare and the financial disaster that it is, the Affordable Care Act. It's not affordable. And that's a grand debate that's now happening in this country. Kevin O'Leary, Mr. Wonderful, you know him from Shark Tank. We talked about this, and he said this may be the biggest thing Democrats didn't plan for, is that now the spotlight is on Obamacare, the subsidies, and how unaffordable it is, even though they said it was supposed to be a great thing.
Yeah, I will say that there are a couple things. You're right that Nancy Pelosi Next year will be her last year in Congress. I think Chuck Schumer, my prediction is Chuck Schumer doesn't even run for re-election. I think he is not electable in a Democrat primary in the state of New York. Although he's tenacious, he may well try, but it wouldn't surprise me at all to see Schumer announce his retirement at the end of his term. But look, one of the infuriating things of realizing that virtually every Democrat, even after 43 days, voted to keep the government shut down, we're going to replay this whole thing like Groundhog Day on January 30th, because the continuing resolution that President Trump just signed expires January 30th. So we'll get through Thanksgiving, we'll get through Christmas, we'll come back January, and I think there's a very real possibility the Democrats try this again. Maybe not. Maybe the same 8 who ultimately said, okay, reopen the government, maybe they'll say, we don't want to do this again, and maybe they'll start right at the beginning by agreeing to fund the government. We'll see where things are. And I think the answer to that depends on what you just raised, Ben. What happens with Obamacare and health care? And listen, they claimed every day of this 43-day shutdown that they had to have major concessions on Obamacare to save that failing government health program. Well, they didn't get those major concessions. They got nothing whatsoever. The government's now open. But listen to what President Trump said when he signed the legislation opening the government, because he talked about Obamacare and what's going to happen next. Give a listen.
So I'm always willing to work with anyone, including the other party. We'll work on something having to do with health care. We can do a lot better. We can do great. So much money is involved, and we're willing to pay so much money to the people. So we're going to pay a lot of money to the people. They're going to go out and buy their own health care, and we're going to forget this Obamacare madness.
You hear him talk about madness. He's not wrong. Even liberals are saying, well, we know that premiums have gone up 100, 200, 300% with Obamacare, so that's why we need the subsidies. That is the definition center of a disaster. It is insolvent.
Look, that was the predictable result of Obamacare. That's what I and the other critics of Obamacare said would happen. It's exactly what's happened. Even the Washington Post admits the so-called Affordable Care Act is not affordable. And that was the Democrats' solution to that is give $50 billion in subsidies from the taxpayers straight to giant health insurance corporations. It's just corporate welfare. And mind you, these health insurance corporations, their stock prices have increased in some instances more than 1,000% since Obamacare was signed into law. The executives that are running these companies are making tens of millions of dollars in salary. Their stock has increased, presumably if they had stock that whole time. Their stock has increased in hundreds of percent, if not more than 1,000%. And the Democrats, I mean, they're craven. By the way, virtually all of the political contributions from the health insurance companies go to Democrats. So the Democrats are delivering $50 billion of cash to their political donors. And what President Trump said there is really important. And we talked about this on Wednesday's podcast. During the shutdown, I hosted a dozen senators for dinner Friday night, and we got the president on the phone, and we asked the president if he would engage and help make the argument that their demands for $50 billion for health insurance companies were unreasonable and a bad idea. And he sent out a series of tweets, which I helped him write, that said, we're not going to give this money for the Obamacare scam to health insurance companies. Instead, the money ought to flow to individuals, to real people in health savings accounts that you control, that you own, that you're the one making the choice of how to spend money on your health care. That is a fundamental reform in health care that will lower prices, lower costs. That actually will help keep things affordable. And I think we have an opportunity to really increase competition, increase consumer choice, and put consumers in a significantly better situation. Now, there are two ways that can happen. One, we could see 8, 9, 10 reasonable Democrats willing to work with Republicans on something that does that, and we could have legislation that gets 60 votes, because to do that through ordinary procedures takes 60 votes, just like it takes 60 votes to fund the government. I think that's unlikely, although I'm sure in the next month there will be some Republicans who try. If the Democrats are not willing to do that, the other avenue we have to address this problem is reconciliation. And we can take up another budget reconciliation. That only takes 50 votes. And it may well be that we have to do a budget reconciliation, which is how we passed the one big beautiful bill this summer, to fix Obamacare and effectively to repeal the mess that is Obamacare and instead expand consumer choice and enhance affordability and give people access to health savings accounts where the money that would have gone to enrich the health insurance companies instead is going to you, the patient, you, the consumer. And if we can do that on reconciliation, that would be a major victory for our constituents. It's actually why I think the Democrats are not going to have any interest in doing it. They're much more interested in taking care of their fat cat political donors than they are actually in making health care affordable for real people who are struggling. Remember, these are the same people that were happy to see food stamps shut down because it was more important to them to make a political point to their activists than to help people who were in need of food to actually get the food they needed. And so I think when it comes to health care, my prediction is we'll have to do it on reconciliation because I think the Democrats will not be willing to do anything reasonable. But we'll see in the next couple of months.
I want to talk to you real quick about our amazing sponsor, and it is Patriot Mobile. I just went to Israel, and people ask me all the time, how good is the coverage? Because you want to stay with the big mobile companies. I've been saying now for years, and they've been in business for well over a decade, that it is amazing coverage. If you've got coverage right now you love, you're going to love your coverage of Patriot Mobile even more, but you get rid of the woke left agenda. I am proud to report to you that my phone worked in Israel. I traveled internationally and had zero issues with my cell service. Whether I was in Bethlehem or literally calling from Gaza at the Gaza Strip, this is not a joke, I had amazing coverage. Everywhere that I went, I flew back to the U.S., my phone worked perfectly, my emails, all the data. I was posting on social media from my phone. Tel Aviv last night, it was phenomenal. So if you're worried about coverage, don't be. Now, why should you switch to Patriot Mobile? Not only are you probably going to save real money every month, but then the magic happens. A portion of your bill every month goes back to support conservative causes, candidates, organizations that fight for our First and our Second Amendment rights, the rights of unborn children. And they do something that's really special. They stand with our men and women in uniform, whether it's police officers or law enforcement in general, or our men and women that fight for this country overseas. They stand with our wounded warriors and our fallen families who have lost a loved one so that there is the financial need and aid that is needed. So that's why I want you to switch to Patriot Mobile, because every time you pay that bill, you're making a real difference. Now, I also want to give you a free month of service. Go to patriotmobile.com/verdict. That's patriotmobile.com/verdict. Or call them 972-PATRIOT. That's 972-PATRIOT for a free month of service. Switch today. Make a difference. patriotmobile.com/verdict or 972-PATRIOT and get a free month of service with a promo code VERDICT. Senator, one of the reasons why you do this show and why I love co-hosting it with you is we get to talk about issues that are not getting the attention they deserve. One of those right now is the persecution of Christians in Nigeria. It is shocking what is happening there. And I just came back from Israel. We haven't got to talk about that as much as we thought because the government shut down, and we're going to get to that. But one of the things that you see when you see that people are under attack because of their faith, and I witnessed it going into the kibbutz, into the homes of those that were killed, including that 9-month-old child, when I met with the parents who lost their loved ones on that soccer field as their kids were just playing soccer. When I went to the north and I saw the homes that were destroyed and met with people whose lives were destroyed by Hamas there, and you witness this type of persecution and death and destruction, and went to the site where the music festival was and watched people die just because they were Jews, it makes me angry to now see what's happening in Nigeria. You're shining a light on that. The White House is doing that as well. And the American people need to know what's going on.
Yeah, listen, radical Islamic terrorists, they hate Christians and they hate Jews. And they have murdered vast numbers of Christians. They have murdered vast number of Jews. They continue to do so. And they also murder a significant number of Muslims. Radical Islamic terrorists, if you don't embrace their radical jihadist view, their ideology justifies violence or even murder to force you to submit. And the 13 years I've been in the Senate, I've spent a lot of time fighting for persecuted Christians all across the globe, especially those being persecuted by radical Islamic terrorists. Boko Haram, that is in Nigeria, is a vicious radical Islamic terrorist group. And if you look at, there is no country on planet Earth where more Christians have been murdered in the last 20 years than Nigeria. Since 2009, more than 50,000 Christians have been murdered in the country of Nigeria.
I mean, literally, these Christians are being hunted down.
Yeah, they absolutely are. Over 20,000 Christian churches and schools have been burned to the ground or otherwise destroyed. I mean, this has been mass murder, and it is horrific. And so I filed legislation in the Senate to direct the administration to designate Nigeria a country of particular concern and to impose in particular sanctions on the government officials, because there are many government officials who are acquiescing in this mass murder against Christians. And so my legislation would impose sanctions on particular government officials. That there are 12 states in the north where Sharia laws or blasphemy laws are enforced. There's also federal Sharia and blasphemy laws that are enforced, and the government officials use those laws to discriminate against and to persecute Christians. In some instances, they simply just turn a blind eye as Boko Haram and other radical Islamic terrorists murder Christians. In other instances, they actually use the law to facilitate the persecution. But after I filed the legislation and I began pressing the administration to designate Nigeria as a country of particular concern, President Trump did so. And he sent out a tweet. Here's what his tweet says. It says, "Christianity is facing an existential threat in Nigeria. Thousands of Christians are being killed. Radical Islamists are responsible for this mass slaughter. I am hereby making Nigeria a country of particular concern, but that is the least of it. When Christians or any such group is slaughtered like is happening in Nigeria, 3,100 versus 4,476 worldwide, something must be done. I am asking Congressman Riley Moore, together with Chairman Tom Cole and the House Appropriations Committee, to immediately look into this matter and report back to me. The United States cannot stand by while such atrocities are happening in Nigeria and numerous other countries. We stand ready, willing, and able to save our great Christian population around the world." Donald J. Trump, President of the United States. That was exactly the right thing to do. I saw President Trump shortly after he issued that designation, and I thanked him. I said, it really makes a difference. It's the right thing to do. He was happy to do it. And I'll tell you, the government of Nigeria is deeply dismayed. And their response, their main defense, they say, well, they argue it's not a genocide. And what they say is, well, yes, 50,000 Christians have been killed, but you know what? Boko Haram has also killed Muslims, so it's all fine. Well, it is true. They have killed Muslims. Nobody's disputing that they've killed Muslims as well. But radical Islamic terrorists target Christians in particular for persecution, and the government is complicit in that persecution. That's what this is designed to address. And I got to say, you and I have talked about before that those who hate Jews hate Christians, and those who hate Israel hate America. That is true. We've also talked about rising anti-Semitism, and we've talked quite a bit about Tucker Carlson, because I think Tucker has unfortunately gone down a very, very dark path, a path where he brings on Hitler-praising nut jobs onto his show over and over and over again. But it also results, not only does he attack Israel in almost every show he does, but when you go on the path of hating Israel and blaming everything on the Jews, that often that same dark path leads you to embrace the enemies of America. So Tucker has said we should apologize to the family of Osama bin Laden. No, we should not. Tucker has said he doesn't know that Hamas is a terrorist organization. They might just be a political group. I'm sorry, but when you murder 1,200 innocent civilians and rape women and children, you are most definitely a terrorist group, and Hamas has killed a great many Americans. But it really was striking. Just recently, Tucker did a show where he talked about Nigerians, and he disputed that Christians in Nigeria are being persecuted. I want you to give a listen because he took the chance to basically defend Boko Haram. Give a listen.
But he's all of a sudden, kind of out of nowhere, deeply concerned about the plight of Christians in Nigeria, which I want to restate. Maybe a totally valid concern. I don't know. But that's weird. What is that? All of a sudden, everybody's concerned about people who clearly have no track record of being interested in Christians at all, including Ted Cruz. What is going on?
That to me was pretty unhinged, Senator.
Look, I got to say, listen, I understand that Tucker's told the world there's no one he hates more than Christian Zionists, and he singled out me and Mike Huckabee as the people he hates the most in the world. But that's truly a bizarre claim, what he says there, which is that I have no interest in defending persecuted Christians. I've literally spent 13 years doing that. You know, I might ask Tucker, does he have any idea who Miriam Ibrahim is? And I suspect he doesn't. So Miriam Ibrahim was a Christian woman in Sudan, and she was imprisoned, and she was sentenced to receive 100 lashes and then to hang by the neck until dead for the crime of being a Christian. And this was during Barack Obama's presidency. Wow. This was early in my time in the Senate. And I spoke out vocally for Miriam Ibrahim. And she had two little kids. She had a son named Martin, and she actually gave birth to a daughter, Maya, while she was in leg irons. And I'll tell you, I repeatedly, practically begged the Obama administration for President Obama to just say her name. He would not do it. He never once said her name. I went to the Senate floor. I gave floor speeches. I shined a light. And globally, the Pope got involved, shining a light, defending her. And the pressure became so great, Sudan released her. And Ben, I'll tell you, it's an amazing thing. Yeah. I actually got to meet Miriam Ibrahim when she came to Washington. And I asked her, she was a little bitty woman. She's not very, very tall, maybe 5'1". She couldn't have weighed more than 100 pounds. And I asked her, I said, Miriam, tell me, when you were in that prison cell and your babies are in front of you and you've been sentenced to die for your faith, how did you not give up hope? And she looked at me with a peace that I'll never forget. And she just said, Jesus was with me. And I mean, it was powerful.
That's incredible.
But I think this illustrates how anti-Semitism is a poison that ends up poisoning every other view. So now Tucker is running around defending Hamas, defending Boko Haram, saying, well, I don't know that Nigerians or Christians are being killed in Nigeria, and why does anyone care about that? And apparently Tucker is only interested in atrocities if he can blame them on Israel. And since it's not Israel that's killing Christians in Nigeria, it's not a concern for him. Look, I think we should defend Christians when they're being persecuted. I think we should defend Jews when they're being persecuted. I think we should stand up and make a difference. Now, that doesn't mean that we invade every country in which there's injustice, but it does mean we use our voice as a voice to stand up for those. And look, as you know, my dad was imprisoned and tortured in Cuba. And so I have a particular heart for people who are unjustly detained and have spent a long time highlighting and doing everything we can to get people out of unjust detentions, whether in Sudan or China or Lebanon or anywhere. And I'm very glad President Trump is standing up for the Christians in Nigeria.
I want to take a moment and just talk to you real quick about an incredible opportunity for you to continue to expand your mind and learn no matter what your age is. Senator Cruz and I were at the memorial service for Charlie Kirk, and one of the people that spoke was the president of Hillsdale College. And he talked about meeting with Charlie early on and how he said, you're going to have to work hard. You're going to have to suffer. And you're going to have to continue to learn when he was so young. And he talked about all of the classes that Charlie ended up taking at Hillsdale. I immediately said, I want the listeners of this show to be able to have the same opportunity to do that. There are amazing classes: history, economics, the great works of literature, the meaning of the U.S. Constitution. And if you didn't study these things in school, or maybe you did, but you were like, just trying to check the box and make the grade when you're 20, now is a great time for you to go back and learn so much more. Hillsdale College is offering more than 40 free, I want to say that again, 40 free online courses. That's right, more than 40 free online courses. You can learn about the works of C.S. Lewis, the stories in the book of Genesis, the meaning of the U.S. Constitution. I'm doing that one. It's incredible. The rise and fall of the Roman Republic, or the history of the ancient Christian church, with Hillsdale College's free online courses. Now, I'm also looking at the Constitution 101. It's amazing, a refresher course, and you can see and explore the design, the purpose of the Constitution, the challenges it faced in the Civil War, and how it's been undermined for more than a century by progressives and liberals. This 12-lecture course is self-paced, so you start whenever you want to, and it is truly amazing. So how do you do this? You can go right now to hillsdale.edu/verdict to enroll. There is no cost, and it's easy to get started. That's hillsdale.edu/verdict, VERDICT, to enroll for free and take any one of these classes. Take advantage of it. It's free. hillsdale.edu/VERDICT, verdict, and go check out the amazing classes they have there. All right, I want to end the show with talking about something else that has really made me sad this week. It's also, I think, really telling you where we are as a country with the radical left. We have seen violent protesters at a Turning Point USA event at UC Berkeley. I wish it wasn't what we witnessed, but it was radical leftists. I want to know who's funding them, Senator. I want to know who's behind this. But it is shocking to see this level of rhetoric and attacks on conservatives who are just going to have a conversation. And it's very eerily close to what we witnessed with the assassination of Charlie Kirk.
Yeah, look, the pattern of left-wing violence continues, and it continues across the country, and it continues with the acquiescence and support of many on the far left, far too many on the far left. This week, Turning Point USA had a rally at UC Berkeley. Now, the speakers at the rally were Dr. Frank Turek, who's a Christian pastor, and Rob Schneider, who's a comedian and actor. So it's not like either of these speakers were particularly controversial in any normal or sane place. But UC Berkeley is not necessarily a normal or sane place. And Antifa targeted them, targeted the people coming into the rally, coming in to see, listen to the speakers, and they were violent. Let me read how Fox covered it. A bloody fight broke out near the University of California, Berkeley on Monday afternoon ahead of a Turning Point USA event on campus. The event, which featured Dr. Frank Turek and Rob Schneider, marked the end of the This Is Turning Point tour. It took place just 2 months after Turning Point USA's founder, Charlie Kirk, was assassinated at a campus event in Utah on September 10th. The confrontation erupted around 4:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. During the brawl, 2 men were seen fighting each other, one of whom had blood gushing from his face. And you can watch the video taken by Fox News Digital, also shows a crowd of agitators gathered around the fight. These were left-wing Antifa activists. They were chanting obscene chants that they were celebrating that Charlie Kirk had been murdered. They were chanting how happy they are about that. Most of them had masks, and you can watch the video online of one of the people coming to the Turning Point event who they beat the hell out of him, and his face is bleeding profusely, and they engaged in violence. And I'll tell you, what is frustrating is, where was the administration of Berkeley? Where was the police? Why are they allowing violent protesters? And look, these are the same administrators, this is the same faculty that allowed their campuses to be taken over for weeks and months on end by radical anti-Semitic protesters, by Antifa communists, who again engaged in threats of violence. And in both instances, these are not organic. They're being paid for. I've been saying for a long time, follow the money. I've been urging the Department of Justice and the FBI to follow the money. I've introduced legislation, the Stop Funders Act, to add rioting as a predicate act to RICO, to let us go after the money that is behind these violent anarchists. And I'll tell you what's being reported now. This is another story Fox News covered. UC Berkeley's bloody protest of Turning Point USA, allegedly funded by far-left nonprofit. Attorney General Pam Bondi opens anti-terrorism investigation into campus clash outside Turning Point USA event. And here's what Fox reports. Last month, a band of demonstrators marched across West Temple Street in downtown Los Angeles in the national anti-Trump No Kings protest, carrying a banner that read, "Defeat Trump's fascist takeover, stop ICE raids, and deportations by any means necessary." And in one corner, 4 bold letters stood out. BAMN, an acronym for by any means necessary. The rest of the banner spelled out clues to the group's full name in smaller print. Quote, "Coalition to defend affirmative action, integration, and immigration rights and fight for equality by any means necessary." That organization, one of 266 groups with combined annual revenues of $2.9 billion, $2.9 billion, identified by Fox News Digital, leading the No Kings protests, would soon reappear at this week's flashpoint on the campus of University of California, Berkeley. And so this group, a flyer circulated before the demonstration, urged participants to, quote, "end fascist Turning Point's youth-oriented campaign of incitement to violence." Now, ironically, they're accusing Turning Point of incitement to violence, and they show up and violently assault the people who are going to Turning Point. It's classic Marxist technique of projecting and accusing your opponents of doing what you're doing. And this flyer announced a rally outside of Zellerbach Hall an hour before the doors opened for the event. Well, the good news is, and a QR page printed on the flyer leads to a page on BAMN.com, which is a domain of this group that was helping fund the No Kings rallies. And so there is an entire ecosystem with money flowing to promote violence. And thankfully, the Department of Justice under Pam Bondi has announced that they're doing an anti-terrorism investigation to go after, to follow the money. And I'll tell you also, the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights is questioning why Berkeley allowed this to happen. In fact, Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights Harmeet Dillon formally demanded that UC Berkeley preserve all records regarding their response to the mob violence at Berkeley's Turning Point USA event. All records.
Good.
And that's because I suspect they're going to find emails, they're going to find administrators communicating back and forth, just like we did with the anti-Semitic protesters, where it is clear that the administrators do not want to protect the people at Turning Point USA, do not want the police to stop violence if it's directed against conservatives, and there's a real moral decay at our universities, and I'm glad we have a Department of Justice that's willing to enforce the law and go after, number one, the money behind the left-wing violence, but number two, the administrators who are facilitating. And I got to say, it is not dissimilar to what's happening in Nigeria. We talked about a minute ago, where you have government officials who look the other way and refuse to enforce the law to protect Christians. In Berkeley's case, I suspect the evidence will indicate the school administrators look the other way and refuse to protect the students at Turning Point USA because they're rooting for the Antifa rioters who are physically assaulting those students.
Amen. Don't forget, we do this show 3 days a week. Make sure you share the podcast wherever you can, and you can watch on YouTube as well. It's Verdict with Ted Cruz, Ben Ferguson with you. Be safe. We'll see you back here on the podcast in a couple of days.